as the discussion rages on with respect to free speech and whether or not pictures of the Prophet Muhammad should be depicted in any way, shape, or form. Charlie Hebdo, of course, the satirical magazine which was the target of last week's attack, has issued 1 million copies, all sold out, with nearly 2 million more on the way. Demand is very high for this edition of Charlie Hebdo. We have the front page. Let's take a look at it now. And of course, this will continue to rile up Muslims around the world who are of an extreme nature and feel that their Prophet Muhammad needs to be redeemed from the evil Westerners who put him in what they view as a very negative light. That's the previous one. I believe we do have the one from today's issue, which we will show you when we have a moment. There it is right there. Tu es pardonné. And of course, that means all is forgiven. And the picture of Muhammad carrying a sign that says, Je suis Charlie. Okay, Tariq Fatah is our Sun News contributor and a radio show host here in News Talk 1010 in Toronto. And also joining us is Ibrahim Musa, who is a professor of Islamic Studies at Notre Dame University. Gentlemen, thanks to both of you for joining me. Professor, I want to start with you. Just quickly, your response that the story as it unfolds, that it was the Qaeda in Yemen taking claim for last week's attack.
Well, I cannot add more to that, except that, it seems that there's a clear link there. It's security. People have identified that link. Awlaki has been a major inspiration. He was based in Yemen, and he was a fairly wily individual who knew how to spin Islamic theology and get young Muslims riled up and radicalized over the internet. So I'm not surprised by this revelation.
Tariq, I believe it was either the same day or the day before, there was a big attack in Yemen.
On the same day, in Sana'a, by the same group. By the way, it says Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, so they don't even recognize the division between Yemen or Saudi Arabia. For them, it is a large area, the traditional Arab area, which was unified during the time of Prophet Muhammad. So Awlaki's difference is that he knew the United States of America, he knew modernity, he knew propaganda, and he knew the Western way of life. By the way, it's just come out. He had hired at least 7 prostitutes. The FBI has records of that. So a lot of these folks who are supposedly fighting the jihad for the establishment of a caliphate are hardly anywhere close to being pious or being orthodox or conservative. These are people who are fundamentally anti-American, who are using their Islamic identity in a way to rile up every other grievance that the Muslim world has in its own an accomplishment or non-accomplishment in various areas.
Ibrahim, I want to sort of unpack this in a way that helps our viewers sort of understand exactly what the anger is, specifically about the depiction of Muhammad in a satirical way, in a humorous way. And we've heard story after story of how in the past there had been medieval depictions of Muhammad that had been captured in illustrations in the past. Can you help us understand this? Because now Charlie Hebdo has come out again today with another cartoon. Perhaps there might be less offense taken to this, but nonetheless, some will continue to find it distasteful and maybe even incite some more violence. Let's go back into history a little bit and help us understand why this is such a mark against how some Muslims feel that this is not acceptable.
Yeah, thank you. I think the issue is that I think a number of wires have been crossed in the conversation here. People think that Muslims are anti-satire and that Muslims are anti-depiction of Muhammad. The core issue here is a medieval doctrine in theology, what we call political theology, and that is that any kind of offense to the image of Muhammad, not the pictorial image of Muhammad, but rather the kind of reverence to Muhammad, the kind of honor that Muslims ought to have him, any kind of desecration of that image verbally constitutes a major offense developed by Muslim political theology. So it's actually a question of politics that Muhammad is seen as a symbol of, as God's emissary, and that his persona should be protected from all kinds of harm. Now, this is neither, you are not going to find this in any verse of the Quran or any reference to the hadith material, that is the sayings of Muhammad. But this has been developed in a post-Muhammadan period through Muslim political theology, and that penalty carries the death penalty. This Pandora's box was unraveled in the 1980s when Salman Rushdie published satanic verses, and the Ayatollah Khomeini, for instance, just rehashed the classical fatwa that says that such a person who offends Muhammad in such a grievous way should be given the death penalty. Over the years, a whole number of related issues, such as the desecration of the Quran in Afghanistan or in Guantanamo Bay, at the prison there, or other kinds of activities of the torching of the Quran, are related to those, but the central issue stems from this question of the image of Muhammad, insult to Muhammad, defamation of Muhammad's his reverential character. And so the problem that we have right now is that Islamic theology, contemporary Islamic theology, has what I call a number of undeactivated theological grenades. And this one is one of those. This animates certain individuals that when such an event happens in which Muhammad's image is tarnished through a novel or through a depiction, this activates certain kind of theological sensibilities. And unfortunately, the burden is on Muslim theologians who have, to date, not yet addressed this issue, because it is a very complex issue, and it relates to a whole number of difficult questions of how to settle this. And there is no consensus on this matter. And even as recent as a number of developers in Pakistan, some people have tried to introduce a different way of looking at that and saying that you should possibly see this as just another act of apostasy on which individuals could recant, but this as yet has not happened.
Okay. Professor, I'm just going to have you stay with us. Of course, I want to bring Tariq Fatah back into the discussion. Very valid points, I think, that Professor Musa has brought up.
I couldn't agree more with the good professor, but one fact remains, that the depiction of Prophet Muhammad in Turkey, Iran, and India was very different than that prevails in the Arabian Peninsula. So, for example, even up to the 13th, 14th century, 15th century, we've still got depictions of Muhammad, of Prophet Muhammad, in the Topkapi Museum. There are paintings of Prophet Muhammad on a winged horse going to heaven in the metropolitan museums in Europe. There have been depictions of the Prophet in multiple ways, but all of those depictions are to make people look at him with reverence. Having said that, in the 19th century, when Ibn Saud and that cult, and in India, the related movements of Puritanical Islam was the idea that you simply cannot have an image of Muhammad irrespective. And even if you had, in Iran, for example, it is common to see a picture of Muhammad in someone's home, or Ali, his son-in-law. In Pakistan, you'd be killed if you did that. And no one has countered that project so far. But it has come to a stage in that right now, irrespective whether it's considered an insult or not, if Muslims can't manage to contain their anger and be civilized in how they react to this, this will get worse. It is a challenge to Muslims to maintain their civility, because that law, even if we agree is there, applies only to Muslims. That law does not apply to non-Muslims. And if non-Muslims wish to mock Muhammad, Dante did it. It doesn't really matter to Muslims, and it shouldn't.
Ibrahim, I want to give you the last word. In light of what I just said earlier, 1 million copies of this edition of Charlie Hebdo with Muhammad on the front has been sold, and nearly 2 million more. Very high demand around the world. What is your view of what will be the response to this particular edition of Charlie Hebdo?
Yeah, I was somewhat puzzled by today's cartoon, because I didn't understand, who's forgiven. Are the killers forgiven? Are the editors forgiven? I did not understand. It showed a kind of a a Muhammad that is very distraught and crying, whether he's crying about the state of the Muslims. It can have multiple meanings. So it's possibly one of the more profound and intelligent kind of cartoons that we've had. I doubt that this is going to cause any kind of major outrage, except for some people that take the narrow view that Muhammad cannot be depicted at all, and Tariq just explained that there's been a long history of depiction. But what you do have, and what you do have in those individuals who are doing these kinds of activities, whether it's Awlaki and the past history that he had, or those individuals there, what we should recognize that these individuals had some kind of un-Islamic life prior to their discovery of Islam. And what they are trying to do is a hyper redemptive activity that they're trying to engage in trying to, clean their record by thinking that this kind of martyrdom activities will gain them salvation. And so what it's important to discuss and have a further conversation about is the way in which Muslims who are living in nation states still believe that politics is part of a salvation project, and they're invoking these kinds of political projects and political doctrines that were once implemented in an Islamic empire, not in a nation state. It's a very different landscape, a whole new different understanding of what Islam means in a modern nation state. If you accept that, that has to be talked about, discussed. And here I blame the Muslim intelligentsia, especially the traditional ulama, who have a lot of clout on the ground, who are unable to provide those kinds of alternatives, and therefore alternative voices have to become much more vocal in articulating what is the best practices that Muslim will have in a modern period.
Well, if they have an opportunity to listen to yourself, Ibrahim or Tariq Fatah, I think that there's good things on the horizon.